Hey everybody, thank you so much for joining us into this section of our asynchronous work. Right now we're going to really get into a quick dive into the three R's and an H. The goal of this conversation is really to help you to think about how you can put a socio-cultural, socio-emotional concept into your classroom through the use of our three R's, or resources, refuge, and responsibility, and also linking it with this concept of hope. We think Nelson's argument point on the idea of schools stand for stability, neighborliness, and the assumption of our upcoming generation can be educated, socialized, and turned into responsible citizens. That's our basic concept of what education and this whole idea of the three R's and H's are about, is how do we support our students and help them turn into responsible adults that will support our society. And this is really kind of a question of our idea of value pack. Like, how do these ideals come together in order to really benefit others? So before we start, I want to give you a quick story about these things, and I'm going to go try to relate it back to my own self. So as you know, I am a Jamaican immigrant. We moved to New York City in 1989, so really rough, like a couple of years. This New York crack epidemic was raging. Then there was a couple of other incidents that were happening in the community where my parents as newcomers really didn't feel involved. So we were lucky to have a Jamaican enclave within our vicinity. So within that, my parents really utilized the community as a resource in that they were able to contact individuals who were members, who were lawyers, doctors, and other high credentialized fields, even plumbers, right? Where if my parents needed something, they were able to go and reach out to somebody within the enclave and have access to a resource. Also, Refuge. My dad has a very thick accent, and when we first got here, it marked him as an outsider. So people made fun of him. He didn't feel like he belonged. And within our community, within the Caribbean community, he was looked at as nothing different. He was not seen as a leper or anyone that should be afraid of. So in that way, he found refuge. He found peace. He found a way to escape the racism and abuse of the American structure. So he was able to return home into his enclave and find refuge from the struggle and hardship of life. And responsibility. My dad is a deacon in a church, and I say this because it's important in the context. My dad has a relatively short education experience. He went through life hearing the Bible and knowing the stories of the Bible, but not really the most versed in reading the Bible. But as a member of the community who wholeheartedly believes in knowledge of the Bible, my dad was able to have the responsibility of teaching Sunday school and helping other individuals think and process the stories of the Bible that he knew well, not from reading, but from the passing on of these stories. So I think in that way, without those three resources, refuge, and responsibility, our family would not have had hope that we would have been able to make it through those first hard years of being in America. And I use this as a way to really help understand that this is not just about like teaching kids for today. It's really supporting ways of helping kids see that they have opportunities for tomorrow. Now, the point of that story was really to help you think about larger scale community. Now I'm going to try to bring it into the classroom context and how our questions of the three R's and an H really help you think a little deeper about what your roles will be within the classroom. As you can see here, like I've given you the straight definition of these terms, and then we're going to ask a couple of questions to really help think about how can this be applied within my classroom and within my space. And as you can tell, the definition of a resource is stock or supply of money, the ability so that a person can utilize those resources and draw upon them to function effectively, a strategy, And in many times, some of our students really lack the skill sets, hard and soft skills, necessary to be able to succeed in their future. So in one way that you can really think deeply about your engaging with this question of, am I providing students with a resource? There's the larger scale resources as a access to DCF, Department of Children and Family, access to healthcare, like maybe you do know of a youth program or a center that provides family with shelters or other essential needs. That's one concept. That's the bigger concept, that those could be used and delivered in school clubs, after school programs, things of that nature. And that's one aspect of resource. But the other aspect of resource is, what are the soft skills that you are providing students through your activities and lessons in your class? So some of the things that you can really ask yourself is like, what are the strategies of critical thinking and problem solving will my students get out of this lesson? What will they learn that they can take with them beyond learning the Great Gatsby or the Pythagorean theorem, right? I still don't know why a squared plus b squared equals c squared is any important to me, but I know that if I have this much money and I got to pay this much bills, what helps me get there, right? In different ways, how are you helping students think deeply about what they have and how to strategize to find success? What are the resources, the thinking and mental processing resources, as well as the physical and or social resources that you can provide your students? Refuge. This is, I think, what many people consider school to be, a place of safety. And for many students, those who are quote unquote at risk and those who are in stable homes really need to find a place where school gives them a chance to fully be their whole self and their identities are not denied. As you go through our program, you've already seen that we do race caucusing, and now we're doing sexuality and sexual identity caucusing. And the value of that is really to think, how can I provide and create spaces that are not harmful to my students? Right? What are the things that I can do to let every student in my classroom, in my building, in my space know that they are 100% valued, right? What is something that, so as you think about with your classroom and your lesson plans, right? You can think about your lesson plan as this, is how will my classroom be a safe place for my students' identity? What languages, what images, what things will cause harm to your students? How will this lesson support and affirm student identities? Are you utilizing positive identity spaces? Are you doing critical engagement with how scientists have or have not been people of color? Where do the LGBTQIA community land in our larger context of knowledge, right? All of these things, like where are you finding ways to wedge support and places to find so students can see themselves reflected in the lesson? Where do I have time to provide personal contact with students, right? Like when do you get a chance to sit and just joke or even check in with students' understanding? Are you getting this question? Where do you need help? Those are some of the ways that you can provide refuge, and also preventing students from harming themselves in other way or others because they don't feel valued at home or in other places. Responsibility. I know that everyone says this, give a student a job, give a student a job. And yes, give a student a job, but it's not just give a student a job. It's what is something that a person can do and feel independent and have autonomy of self and feel that someone is going to be holding them accountable, or is know that they must do something for someone else to be valued or better, right? A lot of times, especially in areas where kids are minoritized, they're always looked at as being victims. So how can you provide those students an opportunity to not see themselves as victims, but as providers, as offerers of support, of knowledge to others, right? So those are some of the questions that you can really ask yourself. So what are my students responsible for in this lesson, right? Or this class? How are these how are the activities they're participating in? How are they active participants in their learning? How will students know what is expected of them? Where do I have a place for student feedback, right? Do you know what your students are thinking and feeling? These are important things that allow for responsibility, not on us. In the soon, you'll hear a concept of flipping the classroom, where you give a bare bones, and then you allow the students to really think, dig in, and determine where they're going and what is determined as knowledge or completion or successful completion of tasks. And these are some of the ways that you can really think about providing students with responsibilities. That also goes to the job of someone taking attendance, someone who's facilitating a group discussion. All of those are examples of providing individual students with the sense that they are important and they do matter, and then their impact has a positive to others instead of always being seen as a burden to some. And I know you've heard of the concept, and this is the last type that was really important to us in this idea of hope. And we really need to dig into a little bit of this idea of hope. And the reason why I say we need to dig into this idea of hope just a little bit is because hope can mean different things based on different communities. Right. In some ways, we, as Duncan Andrade has described in his concept of false hope and critical hope, right? These ideas of false hope centers around this concept of hokey hope. And that hokey hope is like, oh, everything will be better. Pull yourself up from the bootstraps, work hard. This question of American optimism, when that doesn't actually recognize that, hey, guess what? There's some who are facing structural reasons that prevent them from pulling themselves up by the bootstrap, right? And then there's that mythical hope. It's like false narrative that if you work hard, meritocracy, that there is equal opportunity. And as a child who grows up in certain areas, who've seen their parents, who've seen their grandparents, they recognize that the world may not be as fair as where you might come from or where your perspective of hope. So being aware of how your hope might be perceived in these ways is essential to find opportunities to provide real hope for students. And I'll go into more detail of what I mean by real hope. And then there's hope deferred. And this is something that I struggle with and many other people of color struggle with when they would tell them to go to school, because you're deferring the concept of equality to later on, right? In 10 years, in 20 years, when you finish school, you will have an opportunity to get ahead. It's based on this idea of progressive politics of despair, where, oh my God, it's so hard, but if we can overcome, and it leads to no real action. It leads to in 5 years, right? You say, well, the next graduating group, so that's a 4-year wait. Right. Sometimes we have to think about what are the actions that we can do currently to then cause students to have hope, which helps me go into this idea of this critical hope that Duncan Andrade's pushes forward, right? Which is the idea that critical hope rejects the ideas that America is a hope on a meritocracy, and also puts autonomy in the individuals who are marginalized hands, meaning that it's not pull yourself up by the bootstraps, it's that through your own critical engagement, you can find ways to break and bend the system for your success, right? It's, for example, like the rose who grew out of the concrete. It is not expected to grow out of the concrete, but with its own drive, determination, and abilities, it found a way. And this is something that we really are trying to have our students recognize, that through their own abilities, knowledge, and skills, they can find ways to be successful. And that success can be determined by self. It doesn't have to look from the outside, because sometimes the outside determination of their success does not validate them. It gives them one of those false hopes, as we discussed earlier, right? And the really important thing is like this concept of critical hope is important because it allows teachers to have the pedagogical tool to then say, what do I need to give and teach my students for them to critically question where they are and why that is. For example, when kids are going hungry, you can discuss what is a food desert, and then look at ways of students to challenge and change their perception. Write a letter to their politician, and this can be in any class, right? And that deals with issues that are relevant to the students' lives. What ways can they be actors in changing their future? And this is the kind of hope that we are talking about, that critical engagement in the questions of the world. So I'm going to take a second and I'm going to stop right now and allow you to take it some time to do some work in your lesson plan. I'm going to let Gio take that over.